from what you do. Just as long as you're chasing money, do what's right, never give up on it. Well, thank you so much for joining us, for staying with us this morning. We want to have conversations around this Ensuring Inclusive Governance series, which is intended to raise awareness, create public discourse, and urge the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria to act in nominating a person with a disability for a ministerial position. Well, from conversations that have been had, the absence of any person with a disability among the President's ministerial nominees is a disheartening oversight, especially in the face of widespread advocacies for the inclusion of persons with disabilities in key decision-making positions. Let's have conversations around this and ask and raise a number of issues with Dr. Chike Okogu, who is founder and chief responsibility officer at the Center for Ability, Rehabilitation and Empowerment Care. He is with us, along with Ambassador Ndifreke Andrew Essien, executive director, Fair Care Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Ambassador, let me begin with you. First of all, what were the initial reactions, for the disability community and advocates upon discovering that persons with disabilities were not nominated on the ministerial list of the President?
Okay, thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. So one of the immediate reactions was that of dismay and concern, because a lot of advocacy has been done throughout pre-election, during the election, and post-election period concerning inclusion of persons with disabilities across the political process and even across sectors in Nigeria and different positions. So it was an indication of things to come. Let's say that was the perception. And that's why the conversations have been stirred to try to speak up and to begin to speak to the issues even now without waiting. So for the disability community at large, it was one of, vexation and as well as concern, and are these a sign of things to come? Is this going to be another time where we're going to be excluded from a lot? So that was the reaction. It was not one of it was not one that was a happy one. Everybody was concerned. Everyone was perplexed and kind of dismayed that this is going to probably be a sign of things to come, and that's why we're speaking up today.
Dr. Okogu, what specific appeals and advocacies would you say were made to government, to ensure the representation of persons with disabilities in leadership positions?
Thank you, Ayo, for having me, and good morning, Nigeria. If you recall back sometime last year, I personally started this advocacy. The This Day newspapers carried, in fact, This Day newspaper carried my position in one of their editorials sometime last year. This was far before the campaigns even started. So we've been on this. We've been talking, we've been writing, we've been discussing this, we've been reaching out. It's annoying, honestly. I don't like saying certain words, but the president campaigned on a renewed hope mantra. Sadly, today there is no hope, and it is painful. Tough Africa has been leading this campaign. Fake Care has been doing it. IFA, Inclusive Friends Association.
Okay. Well, I'm pretty sure that we'll get Dr. Okogu back. So, Ambassador, this is, a long-lasting conversation, clearly. But would you say that there are any legal provisions or constitutional provisions in Nigeria that promote the inclusion of persons with disabilities in political or leadership roles?
Thank you very much. So in alluding to the conversation, and one of the things that has allowed our conversation to have a stronger voice, indeed, is the laws on ground. So if you remember, in January of 2019, the past administration, under the leadership of President Muhammad Buhari, signed into law the Discrimination Against Persons with Disabilities Prohibition Acts. And that one document, among others, has been a backing to the voice of persons with disabilities, has allowed us to be able to stand knowing that legally we are protected, or we are not excluded from political processes. So in that document, the Prohibition Act, it is stated in Part 6 in Section 30 about the importance of opportunity of employment and participation of persons with disabilities in policies and public life, and that includes the political process. It also talks about a situation where PWDs should be encouraged to fully participate in politics and public life, and that government should actively promote an environment in which persons with disabilities can effectively and fully participate in activities and administration, speaking to political parties and political processes, and of course different sectors in country. In fact, that law also speaks to the credence of employment of persons with disabilities using the quota system, and it speaks to 5% of employability for persons with disabilities in all public institutions. So yes, there are legal documents. This is one of such examples, and we see how inclusion, was really portrayed in the renewed the Electoral Act of 2022, where stipulations were made to ensure that there was inclusion in the electoral process, and even speaking to political parties. So there's quite a bit that has allowed or has lended to the voice of persons with disabilities.
So why then, my apologies, why then would you say these things aren't factored into such positions as are being clamored now?
Okay, so what we're saying is that there is one thing with having laws, there's another thing with implementation of laws and policies, as well known in this country. So while we have some legal frameworks, policies, and laws to support our conversation, which we're having this morning, and pushing for the agenda to be considered, we see that the position of political will can be very tricky, where there is an ignorance of the law or lack of consideration, as it were. And that's why we're speaking to the issues. We're not saying that it's not there provided for, but we're beginning to see it play out in another cycle of conversation, in another cycle of appointment. It may seem that persons with disabilities will once again be excluded. And that's why these conversations are happening. And we're trying to say no, that this should not be the instance or the case per se, because Nigeria has progressed from where we were to currently where we are, and we should not be having this conversation over and over again. But like you said, it's a long and a continuing conversation that we'll continue to have.
Kogu,
can I chip in?
Okay, yes, go ahead.
Yeah. Continuing this conversation, there is also a law to this effect signed by former President Muhammadu Buhari. There's an act to this effect, and the act says it clearly that at least 5% of employment must be given to persons with disabilities. So if you have a law that says at least 5%, it technically means that if the president is employing ministers, he should at least consider 5% of his cabinet to be persons with disabilities. We're not, you see, I want to say this clearly here. We have been begging, enough of the begging. Persons with disabilities are not beggars. As I speak to you, the governor of a state like Texas is a person with disability. Gregory Abbott is on a wheelchair. Former president of Algeria, Bouteflika, was on a wheelchair. We can go on and on. America has been led by two presidents, FDR, Francis Delano Roosevelt, on a wheelchair. We can go on and on. The list is endless. In Australia, you have persons with disabilities everywhere. In Canada, you have them. Why can't we do such in Nigeria?
Well, Dr. Kogu, So perhaps by way of emphasis and understanding for those who may not, really get it, what potential benefits could Nigeria gain from having persons with disabilities in decision-making positions within government?
So much. Persons with disabilities are driven by 4 key items, which we call CORE. C-O-R-E. CORE stands for courage, opportunity, responsibility, and empowerment. This is the willpower that drives all persons with disabilities. Added to that, the World Health Organization tells you that 15% of your population is assumed to be persons with disabilities. What that also means technically is that if you exclude these 15% persons, your gross domestic product will be shortchanged by 15%. So the advantage of including PWDs in all spheres of life is that you will capture the hitherto lost 15% of your GDP. If Mr. President appoints a person with disabilities in his cabinet, it begins to cascade down from the presidency to the states, local governments, private sector. Inclusion in the 21st century will now become a thing of reality in Nigeria. We have gone past the era of pleading that persons with disabilities be recognized. You and I are members of the FRSC Celebrity Special Marshal. Why am I there? I was going to the airport in Abuja on December 15, 2006, and I was involved in a car crash where I suffered a spinal cord injury. That changed my narrative. It changed my story. It can happen to anybody. So being born with a disability, my sister here with me, Friki too, she was involved in a car crash, spinal cord injuries. It can happen to anybody. And now let me tell you, Yoruba says, there's a parable in Yoruba, those of us, those of us who have lost the use of certain parts of our bodies, we find it difficult to, we find it difficult to put life together from what it used to be for us and what it is not. For those born with a disability, it is even more challenging. Yes, some of us are the bridge between being able and not being able anymore. That's why we're able to even speak, speak so hard about this, speak, to the issues. But more importantly, it is time for Nigeria and Africa. I repeat, President Thabo Mbeki of South Africa once said that a country that does not take care of her vulnerable people is a country that is not doing well. I also add to this that a country that does not take care of her vulnerable people, persons with disabilities and the rest of them, is a wicked country. I don't see President Bola Tinubu as a wicked person, except he wants to prove me otherwise. I don't see the Chief of Staff as Chief of Staff, Honorable Femi Gbadagba was in the forefront of making sure that the act was signed. How come he's now Chief of Staff and he suddenly, as we speak, not a person has been appointed as an SA or P or anything on disabilities. Lagos State was the pride of Nigeria. LASODA, Lagos State Office of Disability Affairs, was created. Lagos State pushed and got things going well for persons with disabilities at the level of governance. I'm surprised that President Bola Tinubu, who was former governor of Lagos State, has not seen through to realize that what he did in Lagos State that made him what Lagos State did that made them the darling of the disability community, they are losing it. These are all part of the opportunities that are being lost.
One wonders, Dr. Kogo, let me ask Ambassador, if there are steps civil society, disability organizations, and the public can take to rectify what some might say is this missed representation. I don't think it is too late. So Is there any role for, civil society organizations and the rest of them to at least find a way to rectify this situation or, through one or two other means?
So one of the key partners would be media partners, and that's why we're here today. Another key partners will be the civil society organizations. So why we champion causes, this is a good cause to champion with respect to inclusion, and not just at federal level. I'm based in River State, in Port Harcourt in River State, and I know that the considerations of persons with disabilities in state are very limited, in fact, almost zero, because of a lack of consideration of persons with disabilities. A lot of times what we have noticed, stems from misconceptions that come from negative stereotyping of persons with disabilities. The initial conception of a person when you meet or engage with a person with disability is that of vulnerability, without understanding that vulnerability does not demerit a person's ability to serve in public office, in civil service, across board in different sectors. So partnerships are crucial for advancing development in this country. And so civil society organizations can join to lend their voices to speak against what would be an obvious exclusion at federal level, MDAs, appointments, even other appointments beyond the ministerial appointment list, of persons with disabilities, ensuring inclusion in different sectors. I think another thing that I need to speak to is a misconception that if a person with disability is engaged, the person will become a liability. And that is not correct. Persons with disabilities have proven time and time again to be assets. And that's what I want to add to this conversation, that they are assets to, any stream that they are added into, whether the education sector, the health sector, across board and different levels of governance. So speaking to partnerships for inclusion, everybody is involved, including people in the society. We need to begin to understand that disenfranchising over 30 million people in a country should never be looked upon as something that is okay. It is not okay. It will never be okay. And ignorance of this large sector of people who can elevate the economy by adding to the economy, it cannot be ignored anymore. And that's why we're speaking to this. Now, the federal government is the highest level of government and authority, the Federal Executive Council. And that's why we're saying that this government must show example. Because if you are speaking to one thing, you sign into law a thing, and you're not acting accordingly, what are you then saying to other people? What are you then saying to other levels of governance, that these people don't matter? So we are speaking because, like you said, it's not late, and that's why this opportunity is timely, that something should be done to ensure that what we have said we're going to do as regards the inclusion of persons with disabilities, the intentionality of that 5% is so intentional. So it's not a suggestion. It's something that it is implied. It is something that should be done with intent. And that's what we're speaking to today. So every other person, media partners, civil society organizations, private sector, across board, it's a time to lend your voice in the spirit of partnership to speak to these issues. And not just speaking to the issues, but also in your own space, acting accordingly to ensure that you too are inclusive. Thank you.
Dr. Kogo, I'm going to ask you, well, before I go to Dr. Kogo, Madam, you've spoken about, not just civil society organizations, but individuals getting involved. How can individuals or even private organizations, how can they get involved in this campaign that you're talking about?
So thank you very much. So like we speak to the fact that when there's something that happens a lot in our mind, we say government, and we forget that government is people. Yeah. So individuals are government. At the end of the day, individuals make up the institutions. Individuals are the systems that will ensure that laws are implemented. Individuals are at the back of everything that we speak to. And that's why I mentioned individuals. At the end of the day, we're not pointing to a building, we're not pointing to anything. We point back to an individual, which makes up the nucleus of institutions, which makes up the nucleus of the different agencies. And so our mindsets must begin to change. And that's why you see me speaking to where is your mind at when you perceive disability.
Okay. Let me ask you now, Dr. Okogo. she's spoken to not just interested individuals, but also organizations. How about, engine rooms of government positions like political parties? What role do you think political parties can play in promoting inclusion by nominating and supporting candidates with disabilities for leadership positions?
Thank you very much, again. Thank you very much, Ayo. First, I want to note here that the APC, the ruling party, has been a darling of persons with disabilities. They have a strong disability wing. They have done everything that a political party needs to do. So kudos to them. I'm not a member of the APC, but I can tell you that we are proud of what the APC has done by ensuring that persons with disabilities are included in their political space from the national level down to the world level. The PDP too is doing so. The African Democratic Congress is doing so. So political parties are doing so. We have engaged with IPAC. IPAC has ensured, INEC too, through IPAC, has ensured that PWDs are given their place of pride in all spheres of political participation. We know that elections are expensive. There are other issues which TAC has always led in that too. And the issues that funding the elections of persons with disabilities has also been a challenge, but one step at a time. But more importantly, the APC, that is the ruling party, can they look inwards within their setup in their own party, since they have the structures for PWDs there, pick amongst them persons that will be in the cabinet of the minister. Former President Buhari had two special advisors on disabilities. I think Dr. Ankeli was a special advisor on disability. Then there was another young man, a special assistant. We want to take it a notch higher beyond special advisor and special assistant. Let us have persons with disabilities play other roles in governance, not just in disability. I represented persons with disabilities on the board of Shopee under the government of President Jonathan. But guess what? I was the head of the subcommittee on railways, and I tell you, I beat my chest to say, the phenomenal successes, the blueprint and framework that we put together with the Nigerian Railway Corporation, the 25-year master plan for railway, is what is still being implemented today. On 8 years after a new government came in, President Buhari, he continued from there with Minister Rotimi Amechi. How many people know that? I mean, how many people do recall that a person with disabilities actually oversaw the putting together of that of those plans? So I say proudly that as a PWD, designing the railway master plan, we were able to put in place a lot of new things and ideas and ensure that there was inclusion in the railway sector. Transportation sector in Nigeria is failing. Public mass transit, you can see that it is difficult. Lagos State, I repeat again, is doing well. At least the PRT buses that have traveled on one or two of them, they are disability friendly. But what of other states? Lagos is just one state out of Nigeria. There is need for a change. The president campaigned on renewed hope. At this stage, persons with disabilities have lost hope. There is no hope again. Can he rekindle that hope? Whatever it is, we need that hope to come back. Okay. It is important.
Well, madam, let me ask you the same question, but take it this way. How can we foster a more inclusive and accessible political environment that encourages active participation from citizens like those living with disabilities?
Okay, so thank you very much. One of the things that can be done is to consider disability as not just a special need, but consider that disability and disability affairs are important. So one of the starting points would be for Ministry of Disability Affairs at federal level, we need to have our own ministry. That would be perfect in ensuring that disability mainstreaming happens across sectors. Another thing is that different parastatals in government should begin to have what we call an inclusion policy, so that anything that is being done, whether it is humanitarian efforts, I mean, we see all sorts that happen, and then disability considerations or inclusion is seen as an afterthought. We need to change those kind of things. So inclusion policies and strategies, I mean, even the United Nations has an inclusion strategy. So why can't we begin to adopt some of these measures that ensure that disability mainstreaming is across? I did mention the Electoral Act of 2022 because one of the things that it did was that it really spoke to and allowed for persons with disabilities to participate, and provisions were made, even those we didn't see a lot of that happen on the field. It also spoke to political participation in political parties for persons with disabilities, that allow more persons with disabilities in the disability community to be card-carrying members, and we hope and we want those numbers to increase. We are speaking within the political process, because we know that the political process does not just end, during elections or after elections, or with the appointment of different officers, but it continues and it shows in the cycle of development. So, like Dr. Chike had mentioned, not just the ministerial list, which was speaking to Mr. President to do the needful by ensuring that he adds a person with disability, because ministerial position has to do with a lot of administration and management, and many persons in the disability community have the capability to be ministers, commissioners, etc. So inclusion policies across governments, across ministries and agencies will be one key way to ensure disability mainstreaming. One last thing I'd like to add is that within political parties, for example, where there are issues of discrimination, I'm asking, because we had a case where, like in River States, there were complaints about discrimination on the basis of disability, where current members in some political parties were not allowed to take on the desired positions or desired posts in this past elections. So where discrimination on the basis of disability happens, we want the laws to be enforced as well. So this is some of the things that I can mention. There's a lot to be done in country, and we are stating it categorically. The persons with disabilities are able and willing to be part of decision-making processes across board.
Well, Dr. Okogu, you've referenced this, you've spaded it. I'd like you to speak copiously to this, and that is the role that governors can play at the state's level, and even at local government levels, to ensure good governance for persons living with disabilities. How about inclusion at the state levels? How far-reaching is the advocacy at the state level as well? Because I believe that if we had strong enough advocacies at the state level, I mean, the direct impact to the people will be felt even closer home. What do you think?
Yeah.
I think it's a great idea. And I want to give kudos at this point to Governor Yahaya Bello. He may have his elements, but one thing he does well is that he has employed more persons with disabilities in his government. Not just because of, not to serve in the disability area, but to serve in other areas. And that is what we're talking about, inclusion. Governors have a responsibility to ensure inclusion at all levels of governance in their states. So yes, this advocacy is going further. We're also talking to the governors. Appoint commissioners, appoint SAs, appoint whatever you need to appoint persons with disabilities to serve in different areas of your cabinet, because indeed, once there is inclusion that accommodates persons with disabilities, the first thing it does is that it will create hope for other PWDs to know that, oh, indeed, this person is here. I can also be there. I can make it if this person can make it, because that's one area of influence that is lacking in the lives of PWDs. Our best fruits or our best brains are not put out there. We do it in our private capacities. That's why we run our own NGOs and all that. We create labor, we employ people and all that. But beyond that, the assistance and support of government from the national level to the state government and local government level will go a long way. And that's why we're begging. That's why I'm not begging. Sorry, I don't want to use the word begging. That's why we're insisting to President Bola Tinubu that the law says employ at least 5% of us. Put one person there and you see that the light will begin to shine from top to bottom. Persons with disabilities will be accommodated in every sphere, and inclusion will become a great thing to embrace. Disability is not a curse. Disability is not inability. Disability is an ability to become special. We think differently, we work differently. Look, if you see how we survive, I tell you, the 17 years of my being on a wheelchair now has made me a greater and better person than the previous 36 before the car crash. So we can do more.
Okay.
Nigeria can do more. Nigeria should not be in the dark anymore. We should not be in the Stone Ages where people with disabilities are treated with contempt and, with contempt and disdain.
Yeah.
They should be brought to the table because
Absolutely.
we're at the hegemony stage of it now.
Okay.
I talk about the John Gaventa 3 phases of power. The first phase of power was when...
Oh dear, just wanted you to land on that point. Dr. Chike Okogo, founder and chief responsibility officer at the Center for Ability, Rehabilitation and Empowerment, CARE. Thank you so much for your time and perspectives, as well as Dr. Ambassador Ndifreke Andrew Essien, Executive Director of Fair Care Foundation. Thank you so much, madam, for joining this conversation this morning. Let me not say, let's hope it is not a missed opportunity, but a redirected one. We're back right after now for another conversation. Do stay with us.